participating in our oral history project. I appreciate it. Okay, we'll start off with some easy questions, then we'll veer into some more, in-depth ones about your time as a student at St. Peter's and your time as an alumni associate director of the same. Okay, we'll start with something easy. When and where were you born?
Jersey City. Wasn't everyone?
I wasn't.
Okay.
I'm the rare exception, but
Jersey City.
okay. Okay, can you tell me about your parents and your brothers and sisters, if you had any?
No, my parents, when I was born, they took one look at me and they said, "This is the best we can do," and they quit. So there were no brothers and sisters. I am the oldest, the youngest, the smartest, and the dumbest.
Okay, could you tell me about your mother and father, what they said when they saw this fine young lad?
Someone switched babies. That's what my grandmother said. But no, my father worked for the railroad, and my mother stayed at home, as was the tradition. And I didn't realize I lived in an Irish ghetto until much later in life, when I started to recall the names of some of my neighbors. Hennessy and McGowan and McGovern and McCluskey and O'Brien and Duran and Fennessy and a few others.
So, can you tell me about some of your earliest recollections about school? Where did you go to grammar school?
St. Nicholas, which was an old German mission church up in Jersey City Heights. And it was well known for the German type of instruction. As a matter of fact, they taught German in the earlier years, but they were known for their scholarship. I was probably the exception, but they did produce a good number of students who went to various high schools on scholarships. And we had the Sisters of Christian Charity, and at that time corporal punishment was in vogue. So it was good, though. We managed to survive in spite of it all, and I see quite a few people that I graduated from grammar school with.
Okay, moving on from grammar school, where did you go to junior and or high school?
Only one, St. Peter's Prep.
Can you tell me about how you became acquainted with the prep and some of your early recollections of teen school?
Prep, if you went to a Catholic grammar school and you were going to high school, you went to St. Peter's. If you could manage to pass the entrance exam or the scholarship exam. It was not exactly the worst thing in the world to go to another school, but it wasn't the best thing in the world. And primarily by reputation. There were so many people that went to prep before us from St. Nicholas. And if they didn't go to prep, a few of them went to Xavier or Regis, but there was a connection. So it was very easily done.
Okay, what years did you go to St. Peter's Prep?
47 to 51.
Okay, can you tell me about some of the memorable teachers, Jesuits?
We had a prefect of discipline, and he was alleged to have mystical powers, which we totally agreed with. He thought nothing of enforcing some of the school regulations. For example, this is in ancient times, of course, now, but there was no smoking allowed in the classrooms or anything. And it was reported by the public service transit company that some of the students who got on the buses at St. Peter's were smoking in the rear of the bus. And the prefect of discipline took a dim view of this, and I personally saw this, so I know it happened. He would get in his car, follow a bus, pull in front of the bus, get on the bus, take the students off the bus, and bring them back to school, whereupon they would be jugged. Jug is a Jesuit tradition, and it was very interesting. As a matter of fact, I can recall some of my classmates screaming, shouting, ranting, raving about this no good, rotten school, I'll never come here again and everything. And I met him many years later, and they, of course, had their own family, and their sons were becoming of age to go to high school. And I said, where are you sending the kids? Oh, St. Peter's, of course. I said, wait a minute, you're the guy that was all kinds of moaning and groaning and complaining. Well, you know, you get a little bit older, you learn a little bit more and all. So we managed to survive. There was another Jesuit who sort of took personal pride in the gym down at St. Peter's Prep, and dare anyone, be it student, faculty, parent, or what, walk on the gym floor without gym shoes. That was a punishment by death. And he enforced it. He carried a little billy club around with him. But again, as I say, we managed to survive all this, and we managed to reach, an older age, and the guys would still send their sons down there. So it was very interesting. It was enjoyable. I met some Jesuits down there whom I truly admired, and they, of course, are a different breed than some of the other teachers that we've seen, but not in a derogatory sense, just that they're separate and unique unto their own.
For the record, who was the first Jesuit?
Father Tom Murray. The classes were identified by numbers and letters, and I was in freshman class, which was the 1 designation. Then it went from A through, I believe, F or even G, because there were so many incoming freshmen. So Father Murray was a Jersey City product himself. His father was the police commissioner of Jersey City at one time. And Father Murray had a quaint habit. He was affectionately known as the Skull. He was a bit gaunt, but he also was a personality unto himself. And if he had a particular problem with a particular student, he would just have the entire class kneel down during the class. And the floors get a little hard after a while. But again, as I say, it was quite an interesting experience. We did learn Latin, we did learn English, we did learn, I believe it was called religion then. We weren't up to theology. And an interesting sidelight, we had Father John Gormley down at the Prep in senior year. And when we heard he was leaving, he had not yet been assigned. We were wishing him well in his new post and everything, and told him how much we enjoyed him and everything, and he told us how much he really enjoyed us as students and everything. And we came up to the college, and lo and behold, the first class we go into, it's Father Gormley. And he very affectionately said, "Not again." He said, "Father, you love this, remember?" And he said, "Well, yeah, but I thought I was leaving you." So it was interesting, but he also was an institution. And there are many side stories about some of the Jesuits down there, but the one thing that we did notice down at St. Peter's, and at first we took exception to it. When we came down from St. Nicholas Grammar School, we all grouped together. The first thing Jesuits did was bust up the groups. And we said, what is this? I don't know these guys. And they said, well, that's why, because this way you'll get to know more people from other areas and other schools. And it worked out fine. And of course, to this day, there are people that we form friendships with, and we're still in touch with them. And there is a high degree of loyalty to St. Peter's Prep by the graduates.
Okay. Well, you spent some time at the Prep. How much pressure did they put on you to attend St. Peter's College? Or did you go there on your own volition?
No, you could go to any college as long as it was Catholic. And if you're going to go to a Catholic college, you might as well go to a Jesuit college. And since there was one right up the boulevard, why not go there? So there was no real pressure, really, but it was convenient. And there was a a natural flow from the prep to the college. Anyone who went to Fordham or, pardon the expression, Georgetown, they were different. They weren't considered the regular people. But bear in mind, Jersey City was a blue, and I guess to a certain degree is still a blue-collar district. And there is a certain camaraderie and stick-to-itiveness. So if a large number of guys graduated from the prep and go to the college, it's a tradition that's going to continue. And it did at that time.
Okay, what were some of your first impressions of the college proper?
Well, as I say, having been born and raised in Jersey City, it wasn't a strange environment. We knew about it. And if anything, I would imagine we probably felt that we were a bit prepared, superior, and a cut above normal. But it worked out fine. The thing that I would imagine impressed us most was the freedom that you have now. For example, down at the prep, everyone went to Mass on a given day. Up at the college, you're told Mass is available at such and such a time, and it's your responsibility to go. And in freshman year, we may have been somewhat taken aback. What do you mean go? Don't you have to go? So that was one of the impressions. The others, I guess, were pretty much what we expected, because having had the Jesuits, and there were more Jesuits teaching up at the college at that time, we were ready for them. And I think it was a distinct advantage.
Okay. Once you're enrolled in school, what did you want to accomplish academically? What was your major focus of interest?
Well, I started out as an economics major in the art school. And I switched majors at the end of my freshman year. And I switched to a management degree in the School of Business. So I had tried to keep up with the class, and when I reached senior year, I was advised that this couldn't be done. And I was a bit surprised, because I thought perhaps this might have been brought to my attention in freshman year when I made the change. But it didn't come to pass, and it worked for the better. So this way I got to know guys from two classes, from the class that I would have been with and from the class that I was with. Also from the art school and from the business school. Also from the day school and the evening school. So it worked to my advantage.
You know everybody.
It was interesting too, because while I was in the art school, I was a member of the German club. And I was, after I made the switch, I stayed with the club, and I turned out to be the only business school person who was an officer of an art school club. So it was interesting. And we had some very nice parties.
And how nice were these parties, Mike?
They were very nice, especially at the year end when there was some money left in the budget, and far be it from us to return anything. So we all went on over to 86th Street, which was Yorkville, and we managed to put a dent in whatever monies were left, and a good time was had by all.
That's awesome. Okay, well, you say you don't have any brothers and sisters, but
Right.
oops. Did you have any other relatives that attended St. Peter's College prior to you?
I had a cousin. I had a couple of cousins, yeah, as a matter of fact, much earlier years. One from the class of 34, another from the class of 35, another from the class of 42, I believe, or 47. And the ironic part, this was interesting. This was a cousin who lived across the street from us up in Jersey City Heights. And we knew him, and we, communicated back and forth and all, so he wasn't a stranger to me. But when I came down here to St. Peter's, I had gotten married, and for a period of time we lived up in Jersey City Heights. And we lived on the site of an old movie studio. And it was an apartment built atop the foundation of the old studio. So I met my cousin at a reunion, and he said to me, "Where are you living?" And I told him, and he said, "Son of a gun." He said, "My father used to work there," and he said, "I used to bring him his lunch." And I said, "I know the area. Been there, done that." So that was interesting. Aside from that, just cousins attended the college.
What was their general observations, or what was their feeling about St. Peter's? Do you remember any stories from your cousins about the place, maybe warning you?
No, no. If anything, it was the old routine, the old regime. We're talking about Father Gannon, we're talking about Father Chetwood, we're talking about the buildings around here. They all spoke very highly of them. They all valued the education which they got, and they all appreciated it. They may not have been financially as successful as they would have liked, but they appreciated it, and they did come back, and they did support the school as best they could.
Very good. Let's see. You said you enrolled 1952? At St. Peter's?
51.
Okay, 51. And can you tell me about your first impressions of the campus itself? What'd you think?
Well, again, as I said, we knew what to expect because we lived in a neighborhood, and we recognized it for what it was, a city school. And we did have a bit of grass around and some trees, and we appreciated what little that we had. The inside joke, of course, was going to be that St. Peter's was going to take over Lincoln Park, and that was going to be our campus, but that didn't come to pass. But it was pretty much what we expected, because we knew the school, we knew the area, we knew the people, and we knew the teachers.
Okay. They said St. Peter's College, throughout most of its early history, was pretty homogeneous in terms of ethnicity. Irish,
Right.
German, pretty much.
Right.
A few Italians. Do you remember any African Americans, Hispanic?
Yeah, we had one guy in our class,
Was that Ed Scott?
Scott,
Okay.
and down at the prep we had one guy named Joe Adams.
Okay. Can you tell me about each of those gentlemen?
Scott was a good guy. Unfortunately, I don't know what he's currently doing, but certainly he was just one of the guys. I mean, we thought of him as one of us, and we'd rib him just as we'd rib anybody else, and he'd give it right back. So we were very fortunate in that we were able to certainly get along easily enough. The unfortunate part, if you can call it that, is just that Scott was the only one. But certainly we enjoyed, we treated him as one of the guys, and that's all, and that's what he did back to us.
Okay, how about, I know pretty much Catholic school, hard line, but I've heard from other individuals that there were a fair number of Jewish students throughout the years, or non-Catholics. So
It could be, but actually, for the most part, we didn't even consider them. I mean, there was no thought, this guy is Jewish, this guy is non-Catholic. We knew it, but there was no problem with our people. Our people meaning our class, our generation, our era, whatever. And we would, this was in the days of being able to tease people without, people getting upset. And we could tease and joke with them about their ethnicity, and they would do it back in spades. So it was a good relationship, but we never had any confrontations or problems or anything like that. This was an era when you just kidded everybody. I mean, we called Italians by name, and Italians called Irish people by names, and we called Germans by name, and we called Polish people by names, and it came right back. And there was no one upset, no one concerned, and I think sports may have had a lot to do with it also, because we were heavy into intramurals, and when you're playing with somebody, you play with them as a team member. You don't think about their background.
And what were some of those ethnic? No, I'm just kidding. I'm horrible. Okay, well you were in the management course. You were
Right.
saying. Okay, must have had occasion to meet some women students who were attending during the night at that time.
Yeah, we had one gal, Sophie Maslow, and she was everybody's sister. She was a little bit older than some of the guys, but she was she was one of the guys. No, but it was really nice. It was just unfortunate again that she was the only one. Um, Later on, of course, we did. We never had a problem regarding female companionship or female partners at dances or anything like that. There was one interesting time in the Argus Eyes when I was involved. I managed to read for every play in the 4 years, 4.5 years. But I did manage to get into a couple of plays, and there was one in particular where, just as a farce, we had the guys dress up as gals, and I had a blonde wig, and to show you how sophisticated I was, they gave me a dress to put on, and I put it on backwards only because the buttons were in the front, and I figured that's where they go. But I was very swiftly reminded that they go in the back. And I said, how do you button them? And they said, find a friend. So I did. But we never lacked for companionship or partners.
Speaking of dances, how many of those did you have per year? Was it mostly on special occasions like the senior?
We went to 2 dances. And we had, of course, we had a senior prom. And we had occasional dances for special events. There was, of course, the military ball because we were all involved in ROTC. It was mandatory for 2 years and optional after that. And we had our sufficient number of on and off campus dances.
Okay, ROTC. Tell me it's mandatory. What was pretty much the drill on how you?
I'm sorry, what was?
I'm sorry, ROTC.
Yeah.
The drill. How did you get involved with it, and what were some of the what did you have to do when you were part of the?
We got to wear a uniform 2 days a week. We got to march from the bottom of Montgomery Street down to the Armory, and we got to use the firing range in the basement of the Armory. We got to go down to Lincoln Park and do some drilling. We got to ride the buses on the way into work in uniform and listen to all the banter from the students from St. Richard's on the Hill, which is really Dickinson High School. And it was interesting. But it was a fun time, and the ROTC is a very close-knit group now, the alums. And hopefully we'll be able to form some sort of affinity group for them. But they have stories, and we have some stories as well. For example, I can recall marching with the company down Montgomery Street towards the Armory, and at that time on Montgomery Street, where we now have the municipal court, that used to be a precinct house, a police station with a holding cell up on the 3rd or 4th floor. And some of the guys were noticed to be marching by saying, "Hello, Dad, how are you? I'll be back. Don't worry about me."
Sort of a later day version of Johnny Comes Marching Back.
Right,
So-
right.
Okay. Okay, can you tell me, aside from being in ROTC, what was a typical dress like for a St. Peter's College student in the 50s?
Jacket and tie. The only exception, of course, was an athletic sweater. You were allowed to wear that. But jacket and tie all 4 years. Senior year, when you had reached the proper status, you were allowed to wear a senior gown. You were allowed to go to the senior lounge, which is where the college store is now, and you were allowed to smoke down there. And you were allowed to harass the freshmen, because we did have a form of freshman hazing. Seniors could stop freshmen who had to wear little beanies, by the way, and they could demand that they recite all kinds of pieces of important memorabilia, school history, school song, the alma mater, and it's amazing how we managed to not kill anyone. But it did seem to work out okay, but we were not unhappy to see freshman year go.
Can you sing the alma mater, by the way?
Sure.
Would you like to?
No.
Okay. We keep trying. How about
No.
Yo Pavo?
Oh, yeah, that's a given. Yeah,
Sing that.
that's sure. That's easy. Yeah. No. No, that's
All
reserved.
right.
That's reserved for basketball games, parties, reunions, and things of that nature. You have to have the right atmosphere and the right accompaniment and the right
Liquor. No.
right group of friends and classmates.
Okay, I got you. Worth a shot, though. Worth a shot.
Sure. Nice try.
Okay. Okay. What was the? That doesn't matter what year, but what was the typical day like in the life of a St. Peter's College student in the 1950s? What did you go through from sunup to sundown?
Well, it was interesting because cars were kind of the exception. There was one classmate whose father owned a bunch of gasoline stations, and he got a car, and he was extremely popular. There was another classmate who lived in my neighborhood whom I latched on to because he had a car. But prior to that, public transportation was the means. Classes would start approximately 9 o'clock. I don't remember if they were 50 or 55-minute classes, but we would come down, attend class, and one of the things that was somewhat unusual for us, of course today it's not, but for us it was unusual because having come from the prep where one class followed another and you were finished, everything was great, but here, when we came up here, we found that there were gaps in between classes, and we would go down to the senior lounge, or we'd go down to the cafeteria, or even sit outside the arts building where there were benches and grass and trees and all that good stuff. And if we had a car, or if we had someone who knew a car, if we knew someone who had a car, we would just disappear for an hour or two or whatever it was between classes. But that was unusual for us. That was an unusual experience. And of course, during the spring, it got kind of awkward because I believe it's referred to as spring fever. You'd have a nice balmy day, and you'd have a class at 9 or the next one at 1. And you'd say, oh my goodness, and Belmar, here we come. And first thing you know, you're down and gone, and gee, I missed the class. Well, those things happen. But we were allowed cuts at that time. You were allowed twice as many cuts as number of hours you had a week. For example, if you had a 3-credit course, you were allowed 6 cuts. But that's over the whole life of the course. So it was good and bad, and most people didn't abuse it, so it worked out okay.
But Belmar was sort of like a summer school.
Belmar, Spring Lake, Avon, yes.
Oh boy. Okay. Did you ever have any senior trips like sponsored through the college, or
We got to go on retreat.
Oh, tell me about retreat.
Oh, yeah. We went to Morristown. We went to, I believe, Staten Island, Manresa, in Mount Manresa in Staten Island, and Morristown, Loyola in Morristown. They were very. We thought they were good at the time because again we were still pretty uniform in thinking. We enjoyed that they had formal sessions of Stations of the Cross and services in the chapel and all, but the best part, or what was considered the best part, was usually the relaxed period. One or two nights, one night a week, because we're talking a weekend, question and answer type period in a lounge. And all of these, weird questions would be coming up and all. Well, Father, if God really wanted to, can he make a square circle? And, Jesuits would kindly point out that that's sort of a contradiction in terms. Can't really do it. Well, yeah, Father, but if God really wanted to, I mean, he could do anything. Couldn't he really bend the rules or whatever? The priest would say, yeah, okay, what do you think a square circle would look like? And that'd be the end of that.
They have me thinking here.
Yeah.
Okay, getting back to the academics, in terms of your major, what are some of the classes you had to take for that, and also what are some of the core classes you had to take as a student at college?
Yeah, core classes, we almost had enough for a philosophy minor, for goodness sakes. We had to take religion, we had to take modern language, we had to take English, we had to take philosophy, theology, of course, and we managed to do pretty much what the students are doing today as far as core curriculum is concerned. We were I think, a little more active than the current students in this respect. I would dare say 98% of the students attending had part-time jobs after school. But the current students are amazed when I tell them these things. For example, I would say, aren't you going to participate in this, that, and the other stuff? Oh, I have a job. And I said, so? You have a job. We had jobs too. But we managed to belong to the Glee Club. We managed to belong to the Argus Science. We managed to belong to debating. We managed to belong to this, that, the other stuff and all. And I think it's a question of priorities. And the thinking has undoubtedly changed today, that some things are more important than others. But we thoroughly enjoyed it. In some of our clubs, we enjoyed some of our outings that we did have. We used to go down the shore with the Argus Eyes, and we'd have beach parties. We thoroughly, completely, totally enjoyed Senior Week because it was Senior Week. There was an activity every single day. And it concluded with the senior prom. But we would have a beach party, we would have an outing, we would have every day of the week there was an event. And it was thoroughly enjoyable, thoroughly memorable, and I think unfortunately students are missing out on that today.
What was your favorite class of them all? And what did you learn the most from?
Well, no, my favorite class was English, only because I felt confident, having been beaten over the head by the good nuns, that my grasp of English, all phases of, was pretty good. So much so to the extent that when I was in, I guess, freshman or sophomore year, I had one of our English professors who is not teaching now, but was well known, and published many articles. And we were given a quiz, and we were to write a sonnet, and we knew it was coming. So I decided that I was going to take advantage of the situation. I went down to the library, got one of his sonnets, copied it, and submitted it. And I got it back with these red marks on it: thief, robber, plagiarism. And he said to me in the class, you know, what are you, a wise guy? I said, I wanted to see if you really read these things. He said, I do, and you flunked. And it was no big deal because it was a one-day quiz, and you know, I felt very comfortable that it wouldn't affect my grade. But it was very interesting too because that particular teacher, Jim Conniff, complimented me later. As I mentioned before, I was involved with the Argus Eyes, and in one production of Julius Caesar, I got to be one of the spear carriers, and Professor Conniff very graciously announced to the class that he thought I was one of the best rabble-rousers there were. And I said, thank you. So it was very, very good. It was a good relationship.
Okay, this leads us into our next question. How did that course set you for later life? And
I think it did, really did, because I feel confident that I can communicate.
You can rabble rouse.
And I can rabble rouse, right. Just give me a spear and watch me.
Hey, Bill, you got props?
I had a little tin helmet, the whole 9 yards, you know, and a little tunic. I was told I had very cute knees, too.
Well, I hope he was posing for it.
Well, it all depends.
That's right. I'll avert my eyes, my young
Right.
eyes. Are you okay? You want to take a break? Or?
No.
Okay. We're almost halfway through. How's that? You doing good?
Okay.
Half the questions. You know.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, can you tell me about methods of testing or quizzes or homework? How were you graded, or how were you measured on your performance in a class, shall we say?
We were graded as the result of almost daily quizzes, plus a monthly quiz, plus that unknown factor, the teacher's impression of your participation, of your attitude, of your cooperation, of, you know, as long as you didn't fall asleep in the class, as long as you didn't give them any kind of grief when called upon, with the exception, of course, of stealing sonnets from library. It was, you knew where you stood. You knew during the course of a quarter or a semester or what have you. And the only thing that we used to find disconcerting, and I found this true later on as a member of the staff, Alumni Association staff, we would have these people in class, classmates, who would take the same test that we would take, and you come out and, how'd you do? Oh, geez, oh, I should have stayed home. Oh, terrible, rotten, lousy, oh, no good. Marks come out right up there at the tippy top, and you say, you phony. And there's a particular person in mind that we met later. We were having an event out at the racetrack, and I went over to this contemporary, and I said, how you doing? Well, you know, what do you like? Because this alum was part owner of some horses, and I figured he sort of knew what was going on. And, oh, gee, you know, I don't have these things filled out and all. We're in the last race. I'm doing a trifecta here. I don't know. Well, what have you got? Well, I only got 2 of them. Well, give me the 2. So he gives me the 2, and I bet on them, and the horse wins. So I go over and I say, how'd you do? Well, you know, and this is the guy who all night long, oh, I should have stayed home. Oh, my horse is still running. Oh, you know, how'd you do? Well, I didn't do too bad. I won 1,300 on the trifecta and 35 on the night. And I said, you phony baloney. These are the same guys who would moan and groan in class about the exam that they just took and everything, and I don't know, maybe I had the wrong attitude, but I used to think that if you did well, you mention it. Yeah, I did okay, or no, I didn't do okay. But I guess I wasn't as politically inclined as these people were.
I have another word for those type of people, but I won't mention it here.
Yeah.
Okay, can you tell me about the, speaking of studying, the school library and what its function was in the 50s and who was involved and how did you utilize it?
The school library was in McDermott Hall, and it was, I guess, where the registrar's office is now, and there were stairs going down to where the college store is now. And the school library is where I used to enjoy listening to Edith Piaf records. And I thought it was pretty well used. The classmates would make use of it, certainly whenever there was an exam or something coming up, but it was not uncommon to go in and see the place really crowded. And I'm talking upstairs and downstairs. Maybe they were looking at books with pictures, I don't know, but they were in there. So I think it was a good sign then, and I really think that it's carried over because I've met some of these people later on, and they'll mention something that they've been reading recently, and we're not talking about newspapers, we're talking about novels or nonfiction or what have you. So I think it's a carryover, and I think it put us in good stead. I was here when Father Quintillan was still here, and he had a reputation of ruling with an iron hand, which he did. But again, as with the prep, these are the same teachers that we'd moan and groan and complain about while at school, and later on, maybe it's the wisdom of old age or what have you, but they really don't look like bad guys anymore. And I think they helped.
Okay, just two other campus landmarks, the chapel and the athletic facilities. Can you describe each and what they were like? And
Chapel was in Gannon Hall because the arts building extended from the boulevard down a couple of steps, another half mile down a couple of steps, and another half mile all the way down to where the rec center is now. And during one of those downward trends, there was a corridor connecting the arts building with Gannon Hall. And the chapel was located in Gannon Hall, and in keeping with the times, you would recognize it as a chapel. There were kneeling pews and benches and statues and an altar and candles and everything. It was really a miniature church. And it was frequented by we did have a sodality going at one time, and the month of May and the month of October were very popular months as far as attendance was concerned, because there were special services at those times. I think I can't speak for daily mass or anything like that, but I'm sure that there were some attendees at it, and it was cozy. It was recognizably a church and some place that you could go if you felt you needed a little solitude.
okay, you mentioned the sodality to me. What was involved with that group?
Well, these were guys that would participate in doing spiritual works, attending services. I guess now it would be sort of a community service type thing to some extent. It was an accepted organization on campus. No one thought anyone good, bad, or indifferent if you belonged or if you didn't. But it was primarily a religious organization, and they were involved in social work.
That leads us to my next question. The religious atmosphere on campus. Well, how'd you gauge it? Would you say it was very fervent, or was it kind of low key, or?
Well, as I mentioned before, we noticed a big difference between the college and the prep, but that's understandable because the college is expanding your knowledge and offering you the opportunity to make your own choices. By the same token, there was not a great push or any kind of pressure. You were offered the option of attending or participating or what have you. And I think a lot of classmates did, but some began not to. And I can think of a couple of instances where there's been a complete turnaround now with these classmates who have graduated and gone on, and now I guess we'd say they got religion. But while they were at school, they didn't have the same thinking process as they have now. There was no great pressure. The Jesuits at that time wore the uniform. And we can remember, we used to joke about Father Gormley because he wore the biretta and the cape, the black cape and the cassock. And when he would cross the boulevard on a snowy day, we always used to go out and say, "Look, no footprints." Because he was thought very highly of, and everyone really appreciated him. It was very, very, very rare to see a Jesuit not in clerical attire.
Well, going to the opposite extreme, would you say, St. Peter's was like politically active? Of course, this being a huge Democratic hotbed.
Well, for the most part, we knew where the teachers stood, but they never said anything directly. But the majority of our people came from Hudson County, and the majority in Hudson County came from Jersey City. So there was a saying at one time in Hudson County, politics is an industry. And the only thing that can't be changed is death. If you know the right people and you press the right buttons, you get the right results. So it was, everyone was politically active to a degree. And Father Charlie Dolan from the prep used to tell us he was 18 or 19 years old before he found out you could be a Republican and a Catholic at the same time. Because all we had was, in Jersey City, were Irish Catholic Democrats, and maybe a few token other nationalities. But for the most part, it was accepted. It was a way of life, and you wanted a job, you go see your committee man. And it worked.
This struck me for like a thunderbolt. No wonder Father Gannon and Father Haig didn't get, Frank
Pancake, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sorry. Okay, you're speaking of teachers like Dr. Conniff. Tell me about Dr. Conniff, what made him so memorable?
Professor Conniff.
Professor Conniff. What made him so memorable? Do you have any stories about him?
Not really, only that he was a published author, and he had a wry sense of humor. He was not tall in stature, but he was very firm in his class. But he was able to get along with the guys because they didn't think him an elitist. They didn't think him out of the ordinary. They thought of him, for the most part, as one of the guys. There were some articles that he published in Reader's Digest magazine, some other books that he did on his own separately. And a couple of our people went after him for advice and direction, and one or two went into that field of literature.
Okay, about any other teachers that you had that you made an impression upon you, and what were some of your impressions of them in turn?
We're talking about the college.
The college.
Right. Of course, Father Gormley, Father Tynan, Father Jack Tynan. I believe he was a Jersey City product. I'm not positive, but I think he was. And he was a rough and ready guy, and absolutely fabulous with the students. You could meet him on the first day of class and immediately feel he was your buddy. He had a way of, making people feel at ease. And if there were any kind of advice or problems or situations, you would have no qualms about going to him, because he'd give it to you straight. Here's what you do. Here's what I suggest you do. Here's what you can't do, and how can I help? I think for the most part, most of the teachers, Jesuits in particular, were closer to the student body, primarily because the student body was so much smaller and the classes were smaller. And in some cases, there were private outings, nights out with the faculty, with individual teachers. It was, you'd think nothing of inviting a Jesuit to your home for dinner. And you'd think nothing of going out after class and just sitting around chatting and whatever. Maybe even, go for pizza and beer or something like that. So I think there was a much closer relationship, but again, it's attributable to the fact that A, there were more Jesuits, and B, there was fewer students. So they were undoubtedly an easy mix.
Okay, no other ones that really individually, or?
We had a Father Gallagher in senior year theology, and we were having a course on marriage, and the students who were obviously in the know were asking Father about mixed marriages and about the possibility of cohabitating, and they referred to it as a 30-day home trial period. And Father Gallagher took a very dim view and said, no, we don't do that. But he also pointed out the differences with a Catholic marrying a non-Catholic who may have been married before. And the question came up as to what the other person's background was and where the marriage was performed and how. Bottom line was the students in the know recognized that if a Catholic married someone else before a justice of the peace, it wasn't recognized by the church. Therefore, if it didn't work out, you just walk away. But Father Gallagher, again, took a dim view of that and said that he didn't think that was the way things should be. Only he said it in different words.
How do Jesuits teach Christian marriage is beyond me. That's one of those.
In the abstract.
Okay, as a student, did you meet any famous people, or did any lecturers, special lecturers come on campus that stand out in your mind?
I didn't personally meet them, but we did have some people on campus at various times as guest speakers. We always, you have to bear in mind the 50s were sort of a laid-back, low-key generation. And if there were riots going on in some other area, it didn't filter down to St. Peter's until about 4 or 5 years later, at which time we forgot whatever we were, upset about. But I had no personal contact with anyone of notoriety other than my teachers and my classmates.
Very good. Okay, you mentioned extracurricular activities.
Right.
Okay, can you mention which ones you were involved with And what was entailed with each of those groups?
Okay, there was the German club, there was the economics club, there was the management club, there was the Society for the Advancement of Management, there was the Argus Eyes, and what else? There was one other group that we were involved with. Of course, there was the ROTC, but that wasn't formally put together. The Argus Eyes, of course, is self-explanatory. It's the Dramatic Society, and as I mentioned, I did manage to read for the plays and did manage to get into a few. Society for the Advancement of Management was interesting because we got to tour the Ford plant at Edgewater when it was there. We got out to Prudential Insurance. We did get to have some in-house speakers from the various companies and all. The German club, of course, is self-explanatory. We did meet. The management club was similar to the economics and the Society for Advancement of Management. There would be occasional tours. There would be occasional guest speakers, and they were good. They were pretty well attended, and again, as I say, all the guys managed to have jobs, but for the most part, they did participate in these activities. We did manage to hold the fort as far as any kind of drive was concerned. For example, if we had a particular subject that we were studying and all, we would focus in on that as opposed to an overall picture. The Ford plant, for example, we were talking about motion and time study, and our professor said, how can you have motion and time? It's got to be time and motion. And we said, okay, whatever you say, but we noticed the production line, and we decided we weren't going to work on the production line. And one of the things that we found of some interest to us was the assembly line. They were putting a hood on the front of the car, engine hood, and they were trying to close it, and it wouldn't close. So they got this mallet, and they gave it one good whack, and it closed. And we said, oh, that's how they make cars. So we then decided, as I said, that we were not going to be production workers. But it was an interesting time. Participation was at a relatively high level, and I think it was helpful. When I left school, I got involved in insurance, and when I was much younger, when I heard the word insurance, all I kept thinking of was life insurance, subparagraph, people dying. And I said, I don't want to get involved with that. But having seen the operation at Prudential, having spoken to some people who dabbled in insurance as salesmen, I thought it wasn't all bad. So I think some of the clubs and some of the activities did help. Certainly they formed friendships and things that still carry on today.
Speaking of friendships, who are some of your closest friends, and do you still keep in touch with them as part of the alumni network?
Oh my, yes. Some of my closest friends are guys that went to both the prep and the college with me. Ubi O'Toole, Bob McNamara, Bob Matura, Larry Tormey, George Forrester, and on and on and on and on. But I would say the people that I met at the prep and college, we've maintained contact over the years. The people that I've met at college, I've been in touch with the reunions and alumni activities and all. So I've been, I would say, probably, undoubtedly, more in touch with my classmates than other people, but because of the association at school.
Very good. Let's see. School spirit. Usually people associate school spirit with athletic endeavors. Can you tell me about the athletic atmosphere at St. Peter's in the 50s?
Kind of good.
Kind of good.
Kinda good.
Elaborate.
We played our home games in Collins Gym, and if it was a, quote, big game, we played in the Armory. And I wouldn't go so far as to say we filled every seat in the Armory, but we truly did put a big crowd in there. And at that time, in that era, we had a following in Jersey City. They talk about Notre Dame with their subway alumni. Well, we had a city alumni. We had people who went to Dickinson High School and, you know, didn't go any further because of various situations and all, but they were avid, violent St. Peter's fans. And they would go down there and scream and shout and rant and rave. And an interesting aside, Don Kennedy was the coach when I was here. And he was nicknamed the Gray Hawk. And I knew him in passing. I couldn't have a conversation with him. I mean, I would, but, you know, it wasn't a Don Mike kind of thing. And in recent years, through the Alumni Association and the games and the post-game events that we've had and everything and all, I've always seen him, and I don't know if he mistook me for someone else or what, but he came over one time and started to chat, and he is now my absolute positive long-lost buddy. And he calls me up on occasion just to say, you know, how things going and all. And I say, is this the Great Gray Hawk? And he gets a chuckle out of it, and he says, you're the only one who calls me that. And I said, well, it's true. And he says, well, I'm bald now, so it doesn't count. And I said, yeah, but I remember the good old days. I can remember also when, this is after we were out of school, when we played, St. Peter's played over in the Madison Square Garden. And boy, I tell you, I can remember a bunch of alums going over on the path, of course. Then it was called the Hudson Tubes. And we'd go over. I couldn't talk for about 2 days from all the screaming and shouting and ranting and raving. We didn't have the expensive seats, but we did stop the nosebleeds because we were up kind of high. But the spirit was really, really great. And I think one of the things that we really liked was the local crowd, because we had guys who, as I said, went to Jersey City public high schools, who were all rooting, screaming, shouting, ranting, raving for St. Peter's. And the current students get amazed when I pull out a media guide and I show them some of the teams that we've played. Aside from the unknown schools, we have played a goodly number of famous schools that have gone on to bigger and better things. But we didn't have a peacock as a mascot. I mean, we had a peacock. We had a live peacock. But we didn't have a peacock on the basketball court. But we didn't need it because everybody knew. And we didn't have cheerleaders. We didn't need them because the crowd would just roar their heads off. And they didn't need any direction, nor would they take any direction. So it was an interesting time. It was a fun time. We didn't do anything spectacular in the 50s. Bernie Cicerelli, of course, is a classmate, and he was one of the leading scorers at the time. He still is, but he's dropped down a couple of notches because some of the recent players have passed his goal, and I usually find occasion to bring that to his attention because, again, as I said, he's one of the good guys that you can kid around with, and we can pass all kinds of ethnic slurs back and forth, and there's no problem. But it's all in good-natured fun. But I always do bring his attention to the fact about his basketball career and how much better he should have done and the games that he should have won. And he takes it in stride because he's accepted the fact that this is the way it is.
Very good. You mentioned intramurals before. Did you participate in the?
Oh my, yes.
Yeah, tell me about the.
Yeah.
Program.
We played our games in the gym, Collins Memorial Gym, or behind. I guess it wasn't quite Rankin Hall, but it was behind the ROTC building. It was actually a parking lot, and that's where we would play some of our football games and all. Basketball was still the prime sport as it is now, but we did have intramural football, we did have intramural softball, and I think I still have a trophy someplace. We played down the park, we played practically any place where there was space. Old Colony Memorial Field on occasion. That's down, used to be down on Montgomery Street. It's now occupied by buildings and housing and all that good stuff. But there was a rivalry between classes, and there were championship games that were played off and all. Varsity sports, of course, were, a regime unto themselves. And we used to kid the guys that were on the varsity about the recent game that they had and the bloopers and all that good stuff. No one ever had to worry about getting a swelled head because it was our job, which was a dirty job that somebody had to do. We always would deflate anyone who would come in with any kind of high impression of their efforts. But intramurals were big.
You also mentioned about the peacocks in the middle of the campus. Can you tell me about them and and their legacy?
Father Grady, L. Augustine Grady, affectionately called Father La Grady, was the keeper of the peacocks. And the arts building, which went down forever, as I mentioned before, formed a little alleyway between that and another building which was on Glenwood Avenue. And Father Grady set up a sort of an enclosed area, at least a high fence because the peacocks weren't known for flying too much. And we had Peter Peacock and Penny Peahen. And we used to find it interesting. It got a little drafty and windy there, and on occasion Peter Peacock would spread his tail, and he'd be walking along and a gust of wind would come, and we used to watch him dig his heels in so that he wouldn't get blown away. And Penny, as you may be familiar, the female peacocks are not as attractive as the male, and the whole idea of spreading the tail and all was to impress the female. So it worked quite well until, as I said, the gust of wind would come along and Peter would have a hard time staying on the ground. But they were known for their screeches, calls, whatever, noise during class. And we all got to recognize the call of the peacock because it's somewhat unusual. And to this day, we can go to a park or something and we can recognize the call of a peacock. We were all saddened by the fact that due to unforeseen, regrettable circumstances, namely the local urchins came in and kind of sort of did a number on them, and the peacocks went to peacock heaven. But that was Father Grady's pride and joy. They were there for several many years, and we used to see them going to and from class, and of course hear them during class. So it was an interesting experience. We all learned to recognize the call of the peacock.
sang Yo Pavo. No, I'm just
Right.
kidding. Well, commencement. We're coming to the end.
Okay.
Tell me about your commencement day and then the build up to that big event.
Commencement day was held down in Roosevelt Stadium, Jersey City, which is now Society Hill. And it was a very, very interesting day in that I would say we had to pull in a very large crowd because, again, there were so many locals involved, local students graduating, that the families were all nearby. Public transportation was available if you didn't have a car. And I believe the stadium could hold upwards of 20,000. And I dare say we probably had about half filled. So it was very nice. The actual commencement presentation was held on a stage on field close to the stands. Everyone was in academic regalia in the stands, in the regular stands, and you would come down and go up the stage, receive your sheepskin, which was really sheepskin, and be congratulated and wave and all that good stuff, and then come down and go back. It worked out fine until one particular year around that era when the weather was less than favorable, like it was a thunderstorm. And the local paper, the Jersey Journal, had the picture, which was staged, but it was very effective. They had one of our graduates in cap and gown holding an umbrella up, and the rain just pouring down all around him. And they featured that in their article about the commencement. But it was a good event in that, as I said, it was local and very well attended because everyone lived in the area, and public transportation was available, so it wasn't a problem. And parking, forget, you had all kinds of parking out there. So we looked forward to commencement, but as I mentioned too, we weren't unhappy about senior week because that led up to it, and the commencement was a culmination. Of course, some of our guys culminated before that, but it was a good experience.
Okay. I forgot to mention, Father Shanahan was the president at the
Right.
time. What were your impressions of Father Shanahan?
A quiet gentleman who was sort of a fatherly figure. I don't remember him being extremely approachable. You recognized him as the college president. You could say, "Hello, Father," and you know, if you pass him on the street, and he may say a few words to you, but he was not a Father Jack Tynan. Father Tynan, you could go out with and pizza and beer him up, and there'd be no problem. I mean, you'd feel perfectly at home. Father Shanahan was a bit aloft, but that's not said in a derogatory way. It's just that this is the way he was perceived at the time, and it was considered his position to be that way because he was the college president, and if you were called to the president's office, it usually meant there was a problem. So if you didn't get called, it was okay too. But he was always remembered fondly. I've never heard any adverse comments about him. Father Clark was the dean of students at the time, and he later became president. He was a somewhat different personality in that he would mention to the assembled students after a recent visit to the cafeteria that he was less than happy. As a matter of fact, he would say he was thoroughly upset because it looked like a pig pen. But then on closer examination, he decided the pigs wouldn't even go in there. And he made this fact known to the assembled body. So he was a bit more forceful and a different personality. But he was also liked because you get to recognize after a while. You know, he was an authority figure, and much more forceful than Father Shanahan. But they were two outstanding Jesuits.
Okay, well, you're graduated. What were some of the best guidance or parting words that you took from St. Peter's after you graduated?
Well, I believe Professor Larry Malnig wrote a book entitled "What Can I Do with a Major in?" And some of the parting words that I can recall is that don't think you're restricted by your major. For example, if you were a math major, don't think the only thing you can do is math. And if you're a management major, that can lead to all kinds of things. And I know of instances where it did. As a matter of fact, I can think of a guy, one of our subsequent grads, not a contemporary, who graduated from here with a major in management, went on to become a medical doctor in the field of plastic surgery. And I met him for a reunion, and he mentioned this to me. He said, "I'll bet I'm the only math major who became a doctor." And I said, "Yeah, but it's a perfect fit." I said, "The doctor makes the money, and the management major tells you how to spend it." But at any rate, back to the other, I can speak of an instance where a contemporary guy was in a classmate, yeah, he was a classmate, who was an English major. And he wound up working for the Wall Street Journal as purchasing agent. And he thought that was kind of interesting and unusual. And he thought with his English major he might want to stay in that area and perhaps do some writing or something, but he wound up as a purchasing agent. And his son is currently at St. Peter's. He's in his sophomore year. I can think of other instances where the same story applies. And I don't know that it made that much difference to myself personally, but it did make me aware of the fact that you shouldn't be restricted by your major. And I had a major in marketing, major in management with a minor in marketing. So I guess actually it was a little more flexible than some of the art school majors, and even some of the accounting majors, because you normally would think of an accounting major as going into accounting. But I can think of accounting majors who went into law. So the moral of the story was, don't be narrow-minded as far as career opportunities are concerned. If you have a given major, just remember that it opens the field for you.
We're going to put this down. A few more questions, and we'll be set. Okay, after you graduated in 1956.
Right.
Okay. Did you continue with St. Peter's in some other capacity, or did you come back to this school in later years?
Well, I continued as an alum, attending luncheons and events like that. I worked in insurance downtown Manhattan, and then for a brief time Midtown. But that was after. When I first got out of school, I worked for a hospital supply outfit, and it was interesting there because it was in Greenwich Village. It was in a loft-type operation. There was an office in front and the warehouse in back. And there I learned that if you have a cold and they offer you Cheracol, follow the suggested dosage on the bottles. This said something to the effect of 1 teaspoon every 2 hours. Well, I figured, I could speed the process. I took 2 in 1 hour. And after a while, I began to recognize the fact that I couldn't recognize anything. So the other aside in line with that, they did repair work on EKG machines. And being the newest kid on the block, they allowed me to be the test person. So after they supposedly fixed the machine, they allowed me to sit down over here so they could try out the machine to see if it worked. And I often wondered if perhaps maybe, you know, I got electrocuted or something in the meanwhile, and that may have affected me forever. But I left the hospital supply outfit and went to work in Newark for another one. It was, this has a tie-in with St. Peter's as well. While I was working at St. Peter's, working now, Father Brandy decided that the school mace needed to be replated. It was somewhat tarnished and all. And after much investigation, I found out that there was a place in Newark that did that type of work. And it was interesting because while I worked in Newark, I worked on South 11th Street. And this place was supposed to be South 12th or 13th Street, and I figured, piece of cake. I go out there, and I must have driven around and up and down and back and forth, I don't know how many times. I finally wound up pulling into this establishment and asking for directions. And I often think, I guess kindly, of Father Brandy for the wonderful experience of getting lost in Midtown Newark. But all worked out. The mace is, I understand, in reasonably good shape.
Okay, Mace is in good shape. When did you start in your present position as with the alumni?
1977. Seems like only yesterday.
Good. How did you learn about the position, and what were some of your first duties in that capacity?
All alumni. I learned about it from the then alumni director, Larry Tormey, and Fred Jacks, who is the Dean Emeritus of the Alumni Association, was about to retire, and Larry Tormey was going to fill in his place, replace him, if that's possible. And Fred Jacks' assistant was a guy named Bill O'Brien, and he was leaving at the same time, so they needed an assistant director. So that's how that came to pass. And coincidentally, I had just received a letter last week from Bill O'Brien, who is now down in Florida, and he was asking for some information about some of our gatherings down there. So I responded to him, and in his note he said, "Say hello to anyone who still remembers me." So I wrote back and I said, "Bill who?" Again, part of the bubble bursting syndrome, you know, we never want people to get too content. There is an interesting aside. I often thought of sending this in for some kind of cash prize. While I was at the alumni office, employed as assistant director, you work all kinds of weird hours because you accommodate the volunteers for meetings, and then sometimes you have to play catch-up ball. Well, the office that I'm in has a small balcony in the back facing the yard where the alumni house is now situated. And down in the yard we have some trees. Underneath the tree we have blocks, class of 1936, class of 1937, and these were dug up when some building was being done, I guess St. Peter Hall, and they were given to the alumni office because they said, "Hey, we don't want them, you know, why don't you guys keep them?" So we very cleverly put them in front of different trees, and we took the oldest classes so that we could make proper recognition of their status. So on this particular night, I'm there, and it's early evening, and we have right underneath the balcony a stone that says class of 1936. So I'm there in the office there, and I'm doing my thing, and I hear these kids, local people, obviously small kids. I hear them, you know, laughing and playing and everything. So I go out on the porch, and there's two little girls. I guess one must have been about 11, the other must have been about 6 or 7 or whatever, 9. And I said, hey, what are you guys doing down there? And they said, oh, we're playing here. I said, you know, I really don't think you should play here because, you know, you might fall and get hurt or something. Why don't you go down the park or something? So they said, okay. So they start to go out, and one kid turns around and she says, mister, can I ask you something? I said, yeah, what? She said, is the whole class of 1936 buried here? I said, no, not really. And she said, well, why do you have the stone? I said, well, we don't want to forget them. I said, this helps us remember them. But I thought that was kind of cute, that the kid wanted to know if the whole class was buried there. So I mentioned this to some of the class members, and they got a kick out of it too. And the stone is still there, but the kids, I guess, have long since gone.
Well, people were a lot smaller back then.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. Okay, can you tell me about some of the things you're doing with Alumni since you've been there and recently? What are some of the activities you're...
Well, as I touched on briefly, we're trying to, not trying, we are assembling more affinity groups, and we're branching out, we're doing more regional work. We've gone to Chicago, we've gone to Florida, we've gone to California, we've gone to Boston, and we are reaching out more to some of our people. While the majority of alums are still in the metropolitan area, there's still a pocket here, a pocket there, and a group here and a group there, and we don't want to lose touch with them. So we do go out and touch base with them, and it's initially small, but it will be growing with our dormitory students graduating and becoming alums and more involved, because they are coming from out of town, as you know, in addition to locally. So we look forward to bigger and better contacts outside the immediate area.
One more question.
Okay.
Okay. As a student, part of the alumni family, for somebody who's not familiar with St. Peter's, or actually somebody who might be interested in the college, what were some of your parting observations, what the school has done for you, and what kind of advice you can give them?
Well, I still think of the school as being unique and separate unto itself. We are part of the Jesuit network, as it were, but we are not a Fordham, we are not a Georgetown, we are not a Fairfield. We are St. Peter's, and we are what we are. We are an inner city school. We are a first-generation school. We are a multi-ethnic, multi-variation, whatever you want. And I think that's a plus. So much so as witness the fact that one of our newer Jesuits within the past 2 or 3 years chose to come to St. Peter's because he said he thought it was closer to the Ignatian ideal of helping others. And he didn't find this to be the case at some of the other larger Jesuit colleges. He thought them a bit more, I don't know, for lack of a better word, elitist, sophisticated, or what have you. Not that St. Peter's is not sophisticated, but we are more varied, and we present a better opportunity for students to meet and greet other types of people from other areas, from other countries. And I have always thought that we've not made the most of our proximity to New York City, because it has so much to offer, and it's so close. And I can recall an incident where it was brought to our attention that we had the best of both worlds, because we were close enough to the city to go in and take advantage of everything there, but we didn't have to live there. And I think that's very true. I think any student coming here today has a golden opportunity. I think any student coming today has a rich tradition to fall back on, rely on, make use of, and I think we have nothing to be ashamed of or feel inferior to. And I could cite instances of the school's accomplishment over the years, and I think it's still going on.
Very good. Bill, do you have anything to ask our illustrious Mr. Brown?
Over the aluminum house.
Well, the aluminum house.
Yeah. You should have told me.
Well, you know, I just wasn't thinking.
Yeah, okay.
No,
You can call it the aluminum shed. I like that.
I'm trying to think if there were any other.
You know what happened?
People
That's
around the
really
time.
that's really nasty that I use that reference because fortunately the person is no longer here. But there was someone on staff. I don't want to narrow it down too much, but it's not anyone that you guys would know. Bill might, but you certainly wouldn't.
Well, I got
And-
resources at my disposal.
Nah, never happened. They, for whatever reason, called it the aluminum house instead of alumni. And I picked up on it, and every time I saw them, I just said aluminum house. And they thought I was just repeating what they said, but I was being nasty. And I pointed it out to some other people in that same area, and they refer to it whenever we are talking amongst ourselves as the aluminum house. So when I'm amongst friends and relaxed and comfortable, I'll say aluminum house. But for public,
You haven't spoken about Father Vic.
that's right. Well, number one, he didn't ask me.
Well, that's true.
Sorry.
But that's not, I mean, I just think
Father?
college presidents, you got yourself on there.
College presidents,
Oh, yeah.
Father
Thank,
Vic.
thank you, Bill. Yes.
Father Vic, a legend in his own time, in our time, in everybody's time. Absolutely, yeah, you certainly couldn't have any kind of ill feeling for the guy.
Unless you were Don Kennedy.
Yeah, well, I've heard that there were one or two people, but I liked him personally because, again, he was, of course, he didn't have the same ethnic background as Father Tynan, but you would feel at home with him. Favorite expression, God love you, kissy kissy, everything, and over to the women, and even the guys, he'd hug the guys, and in our time, of course, that, you know, wasn't quite as acceptable as it may be now. But he did make some friends and lose some friends when he was at a New York luncheon that the alumni ran right around St. Patrick's Day. He made some friends when he said St. Patrick was an Italian, and he lost some friends when he said St. Patrick was an Italian. So he claims that he had proof, and he claims that it was not a tongue-in-cheek thing. It was a real scholarly dissertation, and his Italian friends agreed, and his Irish friends told him to stuff it. So, but it was a temporary thing. I mean, everybody loved him at the end of the luncheon. But Father Vic was anywhere and everywhere, always in the limelight, which was not all bad. Was a commissioner of the Port Authority. Several of our contemporaries wanted to know if they could borrow the Port Authority helicopter at that time. And I'm sure that if they presented it at the right time to Father Vic, they would have gotten it. But Port Authority has since changed. Father Vic was politically active, and he was supposedly considering a run for mayor at one time. And Father Provincial didn't think it was such a good idea. So in those days, the priests used to listen to the provincial, and Father Vic followed his suggestion and didn't run for mayor. But he was frequently, if not daily, in newspapers. He was a friend of very many influential people. He managed to bring them down to St. Peter's in various capacities. In other words, some of them agreed to work as regents and trustees and all that. And he was a unique personality. And I don't know that we'll see the likes of him in the immediate future. He was here how long? 16 years, 12 years?
Long time.
Long time.
I honestly don't know the numbers.
Yeah.
He started as student personnel and
Yeah.
worked his way up and exited chancellor.
Yeah. The one, yeah, the position which he created.
To move me to the side.
Yeah. The one interesting anecdote that some people remember, as I mentioned to you, St. Peter's was a bit behind the times, so anytime there was any kind of conflict, confrontation, or whatever, 4 or 5 years later, it would filter down. Well, I guess it was at the close of the 60s and all, when students were inclined to resent and demonstrate, that they chose to picket the president's office, the president being Father Vic. And some of our alums found it somewhat irregular that the students were picketing the president's office and the president came out and joined the picket line with them. And they thought that was somewhat unusual. So I guess they overcame it over the years. You couldn't hold a grudge with the guy. So he was very, very highly thought of, and at his funeral, the church was very crowded, which we were all glad to see. But we miss him.
How about any other presidents? Or did you?
Any other people, any other experiences that might your knowledge
Well, I mentioned the doctor bit. I mentioned the on occasion, yeah.
No footprints either.
No footprints in the snow.
Ooh.
Yeah. Father McMullen.
Tell me about Father McMullen.
Father McMullen, Beretta, Cape, a whole 9 yards, until recent times. Actually, I guess he has been here for half a lifetime as well. He was the moderator of the Glee Club, and when we had a Glee Club reunion in 1993, he was the honoree, really. The men's Glee Club at that time was very, very strong and very large, and if anything, it was the closest thing that we may have had to a fraternity at the time. But Father McMullen was the moderator, as they called him in those days, and there are many stories that some of the guys can recall about going on trips to some of the women's colleges and some of the overnight stays. And Father was known for his unique type of personality also, because he was known to be outspoken. And after a while, the members of the Glee Club got to recognize this, and if he said something that was somewhat disconcerting and all, they accepted it and just said, well, that's Father McMullen. But he was thoroughly loved by the guys, and in 1993, a small group of the men's Glee Club people got together, and we had a reception for him in the Alumni House, separate and distinct from the reunion. And they managed to solicit the Glee Club members, and they were able to come up with a round-trip ticket to Ireland for him, and a jacket, a blazer, with the St. Peter's logo on it. which was extremely unique because this is something that went back to the 50s, which they're not available. I think they stole it from someone, but Father, enjoyed it. It was a nice fit. And we are now planning the next Glee Club reunion in November because that one was a benchmark as far as successes are concerned. And we didn't want to do it every year. And we will have a combined Glee Club reunion, the men's Glee Club and the women's Glee Club, this November. So we're looking forward to that. That will be a fun event. We may even invite Bill Knapp.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm getting more politically active, shall we say?
We have an expression, the Alumni House, send money.
I know.
Yeah. We don't want condolences or anything. No, money. Yes. Yes.
I hear that.
Okay.
Very good. What do you think, Bill? Think the star power.
No, I think we've got some good.
Wasn't that fun?